Welcome in, everybody. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into China's economy, and we've got some really interesting stuff
Yeah.
to dig into.
Yeah, this is going to be good. We've got some analysis from a Taiwanese YouTube channel, and that perspective,
It's not something you see every day.
not every day, no. And it's a discussion between a host and this expert, Ming Zhuzheng. He's known for,
Yeah, he's not afraid to.
yeah, he's not pulling any punches. He's really looking at what's really going on in China.
Yeah, what's beneath the surface
Right.
of those official numbers and everything. It should be good.
So the Wall Street Journal, they recently pointed out 8 pain points in China's economy.
Oh, yeah, been hearing about that.
Yeah. And our expert agrees. He says these are all valid concerns,
Right.
but they're just the tip of the iceberg.
That's what I think is so interesting about this source.
Yeah.
Like, we're not just going to be repeating the headlines everybody's seen.
Exactly.
We're going to be going deeper.
It's a deeper understanding of what's driving these challenges. So let's start with a few of those Wall Street Journal pain points. I'm sure you're familiar with these. Real estate, declining consumer confidence.
Yep.
Deflation. Those sound familiar.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Those are all over the news.
Yeah. So the interesting thing here is how these things are all kind of tied together.
Okay.
Like the real estate market slowing down, take that for instance. It's been slowing down a lot because of things like this 3 red lines policy. You familiar with that?
I've heard of it. That's the one that limits how much developers can borrow.
Exactly. To put it simply, yeah.
Simplify, yeah.
Yeah. So it's almost like trying to cool down an overheated engine, but you're cutting off the fuel supply.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean. So that has like a ripple effect throughout the whole economy.
Exactly. Construction slows down, people lose their jobs, and everybody's confidence about the future, well, it takes a hit.
Which then leads to them spending less.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
contributes even more to deflation.
Right, and that can be just as damaging as like crazy
Yeah.
high inflation. Yeah, because it discourages spending, it discourages investment. Businesses, they don't want to expand anymore. Consumers, they put off purchases, and the whole economy just stagnates.
So it's this like vicious cycle.
A vicious cycle. And then on top of all that, you've got this mountain of debt.
Yeah. 300% of their GDP or something like that.
300% of their GDP. That's a huge red flag, especially when you consider that a lot of that debt is held by local governments who are already struggling just to bring in money because, well, land sales are down and that's how they make most of their revenue.
So they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Exactly. And then you have the looming population crisis. Birth rates are plummeting, and there's a potential rise in deaths that are not being officially reported.
Yeah. Our expert actually mentioned a pretty clever way analysts are trying to estimate
Oh, yeah.
that population decline
Hmm.
by tracking salt consumption. Isn't that interesting?
That's so interesting. How do they even...
I guess when population goes down, people use less salt, and industries too.
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty interesting.
That is fascinating. People are finding very creative ways to get around the lack of official data.
Yeah, for sure.
That lack of data adds another layer of complexity
Oh, totally.
to all of this.
So I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
We've only talked about 5 of the pain points.
Yeah, and the expert from the Taiwanese YouTube channel, he says that there's this whole other set of challenges.
Right, and they're often overlooked.
Yeah, that are often overlooked. And those are almost more worrying than the ones we've just talked about.
Yeah, they provide a much deeper, more critical perspective
On how all of
on how political decisions and social control are really kind of amplifying these economic challenges.
Okay. So what are these, like, hidden pain points that we need to understand?
Okay, so our expert, he identifies 7 additional areas where China is struggling. First, there's the suppression of private businesses.
Oh.
And this trend has been pretty noticeable since about 2017.
Yeah, I remember that.
Think about the crackdown on those tech giants. Jack Ma's Alibaba, for instance.
Oh, yeah, that was all over the news.
Yeah, that made headlines worldwide. And what's important to understand here is that private enterprise, this is the engine of innovation and growth
Right.
in a lot of successful economies. And suppressing it, it could have some long-term consequences.
It's like cutting off
Yeah.
the source of your economic vitality or something.
It's exactly like that. And then there's COVID. Obviously, the pandemic hit everybody hard.
Yeah.
But the expert highlights some issues specific to China
Going.
that are adding fuel to the fire here. He points to the economic drain of all that excessive PCR testing, for example. Arguably didn't even work that well.
Yeah, I remember that.
Then you've got the admission that the domestic vaccines weren't as effective as they initially claimed, and probably the most important of all of these, the potential large-scale population loss
Right, from COVID.
from COVID. And the Chinese government has been very quiet about that.
It's like they're trying to sweep it under the rug.
That lack of transparency, it definitely makes things more uncertain
Right, of course.
about the future of their economy. And then there's the damage inflicted on Hong Kong, which, remember, this was a super vibrant financial hub.
Yeah, it's amazing how fast that changed.
And it went from a financial powerhouse to, well, needing financial support.
Wow.
That was a strategic blunder with long-term consequences. It's eroded international confidence in China.
It's a big blow to their reputation.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's unemployment. Officially, the numbers don't look too bad, but our expert paints a much more concerning picture.
Especially for young people, right?
Especially for young people. He cites estimates that put youth unemployment as high as 46%.
40% And that would be considered disastrous in most developed economies.
Yeah, absolutely.
And their response, not very effective, to say the least.
Like telling young people to return to the countryside.
Return to the countryside. It's nostalgic. It's impractical.
Not really a solution.
It ignores the needs and aspirations of a whole generation. And then on top of that, you've got this recent push to recruit more university grads into the military. Yet some people think that's just to hide the real unemployment numbers.
It's a classic tactic, shifting unemployed youth into these state-controlled sectors just to manipulate statistics.
Wow.
But it doesn't really fix anything.
No.
And it could even strain government resources even more.
Speaking of which, fiscal problems. Our next pain point.
And this isn't just at the local level. Our expert suggests that there's a bigger crisis brewing at the central government level.
Okay, what's that look like?
So they've been printing money excessively for years, and he calls it anchorless money creation. So imagine printing money without any real assets.
Without anything to back it up.
Yeah, without any economic growth to back it up.
It just sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It does. And while inflation isn't too bad right now, that's only because banks aren't lending much. But if that changes...
Oh, if they start lending more.
Yeah, things could change really quickly.
Wow.
It could lead to hyperinflation and even economic collapse.
Like a ticking time bomb.
It is. And then on top of all of this, you have China's military spending.
Right. Always spending more and more.
And all that spending, it takes away from social programs, it takes away from economic development. It's that classic guns or butter dilemma.
Yeah, you can't have it both ways.
Exactly. And the sustainability of that approach, it's questionable at best, especially with all these other issues we've talked about.
Yeah, I mean, when you put it all together, it's a lot.
It is.
It's a lot going on over there. So trade wars and international sanctions, those are our last pain points for today.
Yeah, so we've already seen the disruption from the trade war with the U.S.
Right.
But our expert, he warns that this could be just the beginning.
Oh, really? So it could actually get worse.
He thinks so. He emphasizes how devastating it would be to lose access to those advanced chips from the U.S., Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, you know.
Oh, yeah. Those are crucial for pretty much everything these days, right? From phones to AI.
Essential for everything. And China really depends on those foreign suppliers.
So they're very vulnerable.
Incredibly vulnerable. And, you know, as countries get more and more wary of China's economic practices, particularly this idea of dumping,
Right.
where they just flood the market with products.
Below cost.
Yeah, below cost, just to gain market share. So as countries get more wary of that, we could see even more restrictions.
So it's almost like they're being squeezed from all sides.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And this really shows just how connected the global economy is.
Right.
You can't just go it alone.
You can't just separate yourself from the rest of the world.
Yeah, exactly. So what does all this mean for China?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? Like, where do they go from here?
That is the million-dollar question, and it's one that we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, sounds like we've got a lot more to uncover.
We do.
This is really interesting stuff. I'm definitely curious to see where it goes from here.
Me too.
And you know what? I bet our listeners are too.
I bet they are. I think this is going to be really, really fascinating to see where this all goes.
I agree. So everybody listening, stay tuned.
Yes, stay tuned. We'll be back soon with more.
We'll be back soon with more to discuss.
Yeah, the next part of our deep dive, we're going to be looking at,
The political side of it?
yeah, the political side, how that all plays into this. And it's going to be good. It's going to be really good.
All right, everybody. Until then. Okay, so we just spent the last part of our deep dive really digging into some pretty serious cracks in China's economic foundation.
It's a lot.
Yeah, there are some pretty big challenges.
And, it seems like all of these internal issues,
Yeah.
they're just one part of the story.
Yeah, you're right. What's really fascinating here is how these internal weaknesses are tied to this deteriorating relationship that they have with the West.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the last, we talked about that idea of a Ponzi scheme
Yeah,
that the expert was using to describe their current economic model.
I remember that.
And I guess I'm wondering, do you think this relationship with the West, this deteriorating relationship,
Could that be like the catalyst that makes this whole house of cards collapse?
it's possible. It really is. And that's something that the expert from the Taiwanese YouTube channel really emphasizes.
Okay.
This might be the biggest pain point of them all.
Oh, wow. Okay. So can we unpack this a little bit?
Hmm.
What's driving this rift between China and the West?
Okay, so it's complex.
Yeah.
But I think there are a few key things that are causing tension. First, human rights abuses.
Right. That's a big one.
Yeah, it's huge. You've got the crackdown in Xinjiang, the suppression of dissent in Hong Kong, the persecution of religious minorities,
And those have all drawn a lot of international condemnation.
widespread condemnation.
Right.
And it's not just moral outrage. This stuff has actual economic consequences.
Right. Right. So it's not just people being upset. It's actually like
There's a real impact.
having a material impact.
You're seeing boycotts, divestment campaigns, people targeting companies that do business in China.
Yeah.
And then you have this increased scrutiny of supply chains to try to avoid complicity in these human rights violations.
Right. So companies are really having to think twice
Oh, yeah.
about how they source things.
Especially Western companies. They're facing pressure
Yeah.
from investors, from consumers. They want to be seen as doing things ethically.
Right. They want to be on the right side of history.
Yeah. So China's human rights record, it makes it really hard to do business there now without some kind of risk.
Totally. And it's not just human rights either, right?
Right.
Our expert also mentioned this disregard for international law as a major source of tension.
That's right. And this plays out in the South China Sea.
Uh,
You see China's aggressive territorial claims. They're island building.
they're building islands,
They're building islands.
which is, well, it's raised a lot of concerns about things like freedom of navigation and just the stability of the region in general.
So other countries are obviously not happy about that.
Right. The U.S. and their allies, they've actually increased their military presence in the area.
Oh, wow. Okay,
Wow.
so it's actually,
It's escalating the tension.
it's gotten to that point.
Yeah.
And it's feeding this idea that China is not really playing by the rules.
Oh, so that's not good.
It's not good.
Yeah.
And then you have the elephant in the room, their support for Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah, that was a huge turning point, wasn't it?
It was. It goes against all these principles of, sovereignty and territorial integrity
Right.
that are supposed to, guide international law.
The foundations of the whole system.
The foundations, yeah. And Western countries condemned it.
Of course.
More sanctions, more diplomatic isolation for both China and Russia.
I mean, and it's not just the immediate consequences either.
Right.
Like, what does this say about their long-term ambitions?
Yeah.
Like, what about Taiwan?
That's the big question, isn't it? It's created this unease, this distrust. And it's fueling this economic decoupling we've talked about.
Right. So it's like one action leads to another,
It's a domino effect.
and everything just keeps escalating.
Countries are reassessing their reliance on China. They're trying to diversify their supply chains. They're trying to reduce their economic dependence.
So can you give us some examples of how this decoupling is happening? What's going on in the real world?
Sure, you see it in tech, manufacturing, even agriculture. Countries are looking for other sources for everything: semiconductors, rare earth minerals, food products, you name it.
And it's all about creating more resilient, more secure supply chains,
Yeah, chains that can't be disrupted so easily.
especially after what happened with the pandemic.
Oh, yeah, the pandemic really exposed how fragile those global chains are.
Oh, totally.
And the war in Ukraine just accelerated this trend toward self-reliance.
Where everyone kind of going their own way.
Yeah. So if we connect all this back to the bigger picture, it seems like China is facing this perfect storm.
Yeah, internal economic problems and this growing international backlash against everything they're doing.
Yeah, and it's hard to predict what's going to happen.
Before we move on, I just want to make sure we're connecting this to you, our listener. What are some things you should be thinking about as you consider China's economic outlook?
Okay, so what's interesting here is that their problems aren't just like regular ups and downs in the market.
Right.
It's way more than that.
Yeah, there's a lot more going on.
It's tied to political decisions, social control, and this global landscape that's always shifting.
So it's not just about, economic indicators.
Right.
It's about understanding the bigger forces at play.
Exactly. If you're thinking about investing, doing business, just trying to understand the global economy in general, you need to keep this stuff in mind.
Okay, so can we like look into the future a little bit? Can they get through this, or are we headed for like a more dramatic shift,
Uh-huh.
in the global order?
That's the question, isn't it? And the expert from the YouTube channel, he offers some pretty thought-provoking insights into what might happen next.
Okay, well, it sounds like we've got a lot more to explore then.
We do. It's going to be a fast.
Yeah, this is getting really interesting. I'm hooked. I want to know what happens next.
I know, me too.
So everybody listening, stay with us
Stay with
because this is just getting started.
it. We'll be back soon,
Yeah, we'll be back very soon for the third and final part of our deep dive.
where we'll be looking at potential paths forward.
Yeah, what could happen?
Yeah, and it's gonna be good.
This is the good stuff. All right, everybody, until then.
See ya.
So we've been talking about all these challenges facing China, right? Their economy, their relationship with the West. It seems like they're at a real crossroads.
Yeah, they've got some tough choices to make.
Some big decisions coming up.
Big decisions, and, our expert says they're facing this, critical decision,
Okay.
whether to keep going down this same path or make some big changes.
Like a fork in the road.
Yeah, like a fork in the road. Each path leads to very different outcomes.
So let's break it down. Let's start with the first option, like doubling down.
Doubling down.
And the current path, what would that even look like?
Yeah. So imagine a China that's even more authoritarian, tightening their grip on everything, increasing surveillance, cracking down even harder on any kind of dissent. Economically, we could see them shifting towards more self-reliance, prioritizing their domestic markets, reducing their dependence on foreign trade, foreign
Yeah.
technology, all of that.
So basically, they're becoming more isolated.
More isolated. Yeah.
But how would they keep growing their economy, keep up their global influence?
Yeah.
Because they've relied so much on Western markets and technology to get to where they are now.
That's the gamble, right? The bet is that they can leverage their domestic market, their own technology, their strategic partnerships with other countries, and create this kind of parallel system.
A parallel economic system.
Yeah, one that's completely separate from the West.
That's a bold move.
It's incredibly risky, though.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't that come at a huge cost?
Yeah.
Like less innovation, lower standards of living, maybe even conflict with other countries if they're trying to secure resources and expand their influence?
You're hitting on all the major concerns. It's high risk, high reward,
High stakes.
really high stakes. They're basically betting that they can defy the odds and become a superpower on their own terms.
Okay, so that's one path. What about the alternative? What would real reform look like in China?
So for that, we have to imagine a very different China. Economically, you'd see a lot more free market principles, less government intervention, a more competitive and innovative private sector.
So kind of what Western countries have been suggesting all along.
Exactly. But politically, this would require a huge shift in how the Chinese Communist Party operates. Their grip on power would have to loosen.
That's a big change. Would they ever go for that?
It would take a lot. You'd need more transparency, more accountability, more respect for human rights, maybe even some form of democratic participation, to give people more of a voice.
Wow, that's a huge shift. Is there any chance that could actually happen?
It's definitely a tough path. But it's not totally unprecedented. We've seen big changes in other countries.
So you're saying it's not impossible.
Not impossible. And
Yeah.
some people argue that it's the only way China can really be stable and prosperous in the long run.
A more open, more democratic China.
Right. They could be a more reliable partner globally, too. Less tension, more cooperation.
So what should people be looking for, to see which way they're going?
Look for signs, right? What's going on in the Chinese Communist Party? Is there any pushback, any desire for reform? What are their economic policies focusing on? State control or free markets? And how are they acting globally? Responsible or reckless?
Okay, so those are the things to watch. So basically, China's future is not set in stone.
It's constantly evolving.
It's a dynamic situation. And there are a lot of different ways this could all play out.
A lot of different paths. And the decisions their leaders make and how the rest of the world reacts, that's going to shape the whole 21st century.
Well, this deep dive has been incredible.
Really eye-opening.
It really highlights just how complex all of this is.
It's complicated.
And I think it shows how important it is to really stay informed.
To think critically about what's going on.
Because the world's changing so fast.
So fast. And things are not always what they seem.
Exactly. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive. It's been a fascinating conversation.
It has.
And we'll be back soon with more topics to explore. Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep the conversation going.
Absolutely. See you next time.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode and found it valuable. If you did, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. It really helps us reach more amazing listeners like you. Thanks again for your support, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Bye for now.